There's a name for the specific experience of knowing exactly how to do something, having done it before, knowing it would take 20 minutes, and not being able to make yourself begin. It isn't laziness. It isn't avoidance. It isn't a discipline problem. And in the next few minutes, that name is going to change the way you understand something you've been carrying for a very long time. Because the freeze that happens before a known task, one you've completed before, one you actually want to finish, that freeze is not a mystery. It has a mechanism. And when you understand the mechanism, the story you've been telling about yourself starts to come apart. Here's what it actually looks like. Not the dramatic version. Not staring at the ceiling. Not avoiding the task entirely. The specific version. You open the document. You read the first line. You close the document. You open it again 10 minutes later. You read the same first line. You close it again. Maybe you reorganize something nearby. Maybe you make a coffee you don't drink. Maybe you just sit there, fully aware of what needs to happen, fully aware that you are not doing it, and completely unable to explain the distance between those two things. This is not the freeze that happens before something hard. This is the freeze that happens before something known, something manageable, something you have done before, possibly dozens of times. That distinction matters enormously. And it's the part that no one talks about. Because the narrative around ADHD and task paralysis usually focuses on overwhelming tasks, things that feel too big, too complex, too undefined. And yes, those are real. But the freeze before the known task, the 20-minute email, the form you filled out before, the call you've made 100 times, that freeze carries a specific kind of shame that the overwhelming task framing doesn't reach. It sounds from the inside something like, I know how to do this. I have done this. There is no reason I cannot begin. And yet, that and yet is what this video is about. So let me walk you through what's actually happening in the brain during that freeze. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, sequencing, and initiating action, relies on dopamine to transmit what researchers sometimes call the start signal. Not dopamine as a mood chemical, dopamine as a functional signal, the neurological instruction that tells the brain, this is the moment to begin. In a neurotypical brain, that signal fires with reasonable reliability when the conditions for a task are present. The task is there. The time is there. The signal arrives. In the ADHD brain, that signal is inconsistent, not absent entirely. Inconsistent, which means there are days when it fires perfectly, when you sit down and begin and the task moves and you wonder what the problem ever was. And there are days when the conditions are identical, the task is the same, you are the same person, and the signal doesn't arrive. Research on dopamine regulation in ADHD consistently shows that this isn't about effort or desire. The signal doesn't care how much you want to do the task. It doesn't respond to logic, to the internal voice that says this is important, or you've done this before, or it will only take 20 minutes. The signal is not listening to that voice. And this is the part that matters most. The capability and the paralysis are not contradictions. They exist in the same brain, in the same body, on the same afternoon. The capability is real. The paralysis is also real. And they are produced by completely different systems, which is why the experience feels so specifically maddening. You know you can, and you still can't begin. That is not a character flaw. That is a brain running an unreliable start signal. Now here's the layer that most explanations of task paralysis leave out entirely. For high-masking women, women who built sophisticated compensation strategies early, who were told they were bright, who learned to perform competence before they understood that performance was what they were doing, the freeze carries an extra weight. Because the intelligence is visible, the paralysis is not, which means the gap between what you appear to be capable of and what you can actually produce on a given Tuesday afternoon is wider than it is for almost anyone else in the room. The woman who looks the most organized is often running the highest cognitive overhead. Every meeting where you tracked the conversation and monitored your own body language and made the social calculations and suppressed the 7 things you almost said, that is not one task running in the background. That is 4 tasks running simultaneously, consuming the dopamine that was supposed to help you initiate the follow-up email afterward. And then the meeting ends, and the email sits there, and you know exactly what it needs to say. And the freeze arrives. And the thought that arrives with it, which is perhaps the most damaging thought in this entire pattern, is even this. I can't even do this. That thought is not a personality assessment. That thought is what happens when a brain has spent its available dopamine on performance and has nothing left for initiation. It makes complete sense that you feel that way. It makes complete sense that the freeze arrives precisely when you finally have time to work, because the masking depleted the signal. And the signal was already unreliable to begin with. The capability and the paralysis are not contradictions. They are the same brain running two different systems, and one of them has been failing quietly your entire life. Not because of who you are, because of how the signal works. If this is the pattern you're living, the freeze, the shame, the knowing and still not starting, there's a resource in the description built specifically for the day after the collapse. Not a habit system, not a productivity framework. A 3-day guided structure for getting moving again without judgment, without pressure, and without pretending the freeze didn't happen. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. So, what actually works? And this is important, because the answer is not try harder, or want it more, or build a better routine. The answer is, give the brain a signal it can use, since the internal one isn't arriving. The initiation signal can be substituted. Not perfectly, not every time, but with enough consistency to be worth understanding. The first substitute is external time pressure. The ADHD brain initiates more reliably under deadline, not because you work better under stress, but because urgency is one of the few signals strong enough to substitute for the missing dopamine trigger. This is why things get done the night before. This is not a character flaw. This is the brain finding the signal it needed through the only reliable channel available. You can manufacture a version of that signal without waiting for the real deadline. A 10-minute timer. A commitment to someone else. An artificial constraint that creates the condition the brain needs to begin. The second substitute is body doubling. Working in the presence of another person, even someone doing something entirely unrelated, even on a video call where no one is speaking, activates a different part of the brain's attention system. The social awareness creates a low-level signal that can substitute for the initiation signal the brain isn't generating on its own. This sounds strange until it works. And then it sounds obvious. The third substitute is the smallest possible entry point, not the task. The first physical action of the task. Not write the email, open the email, type the subject line. One word. The brain's initiation failure is most acute at the threshold between not doing and doing. Once contact is made, once the physical action has begun, the signal often arrives on its own. Not always, but often enough. This is not a trick. This is the mechanism working in reverse. You are not waiting for the signal to start. You are using the start to generate the signal. And the next time the freeze arrives, because it will arrive again, you will know what you're actually looking at, not evidence of who you are. A brain waiting for the signal it needs. If you want to take this further on the day it actually happens, when the freeze is real and the task is sitting there, the resource in the description is built for exactly that moment. Link in the description and in the pinned comment. What's the task that freezes you most reliably? The one you know you can do and still can't start. Here is what's true now that wasn't true 20 minutes ago. The freeze before the known task has a name. It has a mechanism. And that mechanism has nothing to do with your intelligence, your desire, your character, or your effort. It has to do with an initiation signal that fires inconsistently in the ADHD brain. Independent of what you want, independent of what you're capable of, independent of how many times you've done this before. That and yet that lives between knowing and beginning. It is not proof of who you are. It is the signal gap. And the signal gap is not a moral position. It is a brain function. You spent years building a case against yourself using this freeze as evidence. The case was built on a misreading. The evidence was never about you. It was about a brain that needed a different signal and never got one, because no one knew to look for it. What we cover today isn't a fix. It's a translation. And here's what you can do with it. The next time you hit the wall before something that matters, something you know how to do, something you've done before, you will know what you're actually looking at. Not evidence of who you are. A brain waiting for the signal it needs. That's a different starting place. It's yours now.